All right, let's kick it off. So again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks a lot for attending today's webinar in which we are going to focus on the topic of becoming AI native. My name is Laura Stevens. I'm a managing director at Board of Innovation, and I'm joined today by Naomi Beckett, who's a data and AI director at BOI as well. And so, as mentioned, we are going to discuss why we believe that a substantial share of companies still fail to turn AI into measurable business value. And so, as you can see on this table of content, we will link that to the industry dominant AI playbook, which we believe has failed, and we will share our perspective on what an alternative AI native approach would look like. And then we'll walk you through what that really means. And by the end of the presentation, we hope to leave you with a few practical tips and tricks on how to get started. As usual, a few practicalities before we begin. On the next slide, for those of you who don't know BOI, we are an AI consultancy firm that helps organizations and leaders to really transform, rewire how they invent, how they market, how they sell, and how they transform their organizations through and for AI, with a pretty much with a big focus on growth. We mostly work with Fortune 500 companies, but we've recently also started to support very ambitious scale-ups with their AI transformation too. The webinar is being recorded and we'll be sharing the replay as always with you afterwards. Also, feel free to drop any questions in the chat at any time. We'll definitely keep an eye on them throughout the webinar. And if all goes well, we'll also have some time at the end for Q&A. So let's dive into our first section on the next slide, which focuses on our conviction that the traditional industry dominant AI playbook has failed. And if we go to the next slide, I guess we all recognize the huge excitement around AI. And clearly that's for good reasons. I mean, this technology has matured faster than almost any innovation in recent memory. While at the same time, we also know that achieving enterprise-wide value has proven to be very difficult for most companies. And just to give a few numbers in case they're not familiar, 2/3 of businesses indicate that they are stuck in AI pilot phases. In the same line, BCG research shows that only 26% of companies have developed capabilities to move beyond proof of concepts and really generate tangible value from AI. And then most recently, an MIT research, I definitely recommend you to check it out if you haven't seen it, reported that despite 30 to 40 billion of dollars investment into Gen AI, only 95% of organizations are actually getting zero return. So surprisingly, just about 5% of AI pilots are extracting millions in value, while the vast majority actually remain stuck with no measurable P&L impact. And so the study also concludes that this divide does not seem to be driven by model quality regulation, but it's really determined by the approach. So I think these numbers make one thing very clear, and that is that the way that most companies have been approaching AI, or the industry dominant AI implementation playbook, is simply not working. So let's talk a little bit about what that standard implementation playbook looks like. So indeed, on this slide, you can see that it's largely characterized by a few very pervasive elements or recommendations. First, bottom-up hunting for use cases with a focus on chasing the quick wins and efficiency gains, preferably with minimal disruption to existing ways of working. Second, retrofitting or layering AI on top of legacy workflows and processes. And then finally, implementing AI use cases as siloed, often vertical specific or function specific solutions without changing the underlying system or organizational structure. And then on top of that, the whole effort is typically wrapped in very old school governance models with councils and committees and approval flows that are designed to control risk rather than to enable flow. And so that approach is problematic for a variety of reasons, which we will discuss over the course of this presentation. So let's first zoom in on each of these characteristics or flaws one by one. If we move to the next slides. The first one, so I already mentioned bottom-up hunting for use cases and chasing quick wins. So for everyone who's in the industry, you probably know that this is the number one question. We want to focus on quick wins, or we're asking everyone to ideate use cases. So we often see that with our clients at least. And I assume quite a lot of you have, in that respect, read the story and the AI journey of Johnson & Johnson, which has been published in the Wall Street Journal. Definitely recommend you to check it out if you haven't. So they started their AI journey with very broad experimentation across the organization. And so they called it the 1,000 flower approach. And it basically involves a number of use cases or ideas that were germinating from across the company and which made their way through a centralized governance board. And so at one point, they pressed the pause button, and so they noticed that they were pursuing nearly 900 individual use cases, many that were basically redundant or simply didn't work. And so as the company started to track the value that AI was generating for them, they found that only 10 to 15% of the use cases were actually driving about 80% of the value. And so obviously since then, they have shifted their AI strategy away from very broad bottom-up experimentation to a much more focused approach. So that has been quite an expensive learning curve. And I would argue that most companies simply don't have the resources, so both financially as well as from a people and a capacity point of view, to follow the same approach because it typically spreads resources too thin. Moreover, what we often see, and then we can flip to the next slide, is that these bottom-up experiments tend to be very, very focused on quick hacks, productivity improvements, efficiency gains. So typical examples are automating manual workflows or creating assistance for reports or stitching simple apps together with connectors. And so that also means that these can be implemented by anyone with the same tool or platforms. So that means that efficiency gains or efficiency with AI becomes a new baseline and not a differentiator. So in other words, the focus on chasing efficiency and productivity hacks often overlooks, in our point of view, the opportunity to build capabilities that others can't easily copy or those that can strengthen your competitive position. So we often use the term or the expression, if everyone gets faster, then no one gets ahead. Our core conviction is that AI is not just about defense. It opens new market spaces, new business models. So if you're only using AI for incremental efficiency, you're basically leaving all the growth opportunities to others who are willing to stretch the thinking. And then if we move to the next slide, you'll see a second problem that is inherent to the industry dominant playbook. And that is that it often tries to retrofit or to layer AI on top of legacy processes or workflows, rather than redesigning these processes from the ground up. Now, the issue with that approach is that AI is not just a tool, but it changes how work and by whom work actually gets done. And because AI changes who does the work, how fast it happens, how decisions are made, old workflows do not longer fit. So if you don't redesign around these shifts, you get a few significant problems in our experience. So first, you preserve inefficiencies because you're simply automating workflows that were designed for a pre-AI area. And these are often filled, as we all know, with handoffs, redundancies, outdated assumptions. Second, it also blocks real cost savings because you end up scaling the very complexity that you basically should be eliminating. And so in other words, AI becomes a band-aid on a broken process rather than a chance to redesign how work should actually flow in an AI-first world. And then finally, because use cases without a redesign of the underlying process are local patches, it also means that AI at best will solve one step in one function, I think a marketing classifier, while all the upstream and the downstream steps stay the same. And so basically any benefits will eventually die in handoffs. And so over time, and we can now move to the next slides, these kind of patterns or quick fixes, retrofitting, layering AI on top of old processes contribute to the buildup of what we call the fragile organization. And that organization, I'm sure a lot of you recognize that is characterized by brittle processes, siloed systems, fragmented solutions, and also short-term fixes that look efficient on the surface, but collapse under pressure. And sorry, my cat is preparing to contribute to this webinar. So we see that over and over again in our work, a lot of skilled expert teams that spend most of their time patching brittle processes, firefighting bugs, reconciling any broken data flows, and also maintaining workarounds. I've experienced myself when I was working in the industry. And so simply because the system is brittle by design, and it's clear that those kind of fragile systems, they drain energy, but also the compounding complexity that you're building is also paralyzing your ability to adapt. And interestingly, if we go to the next slides, the MIT study I was referring to, so a very recent one published in, I believe, August 2025, finds that companies are explicitly looking for AI systems that fit their existing workflows, which to me is very much just a proof of the problem, right? Instead of asking how work itself should change in an AI-first world, too many are still trying to retrofit AI into the very legacy processes that makes them fragile in the first place. And then finally, a third very related problem of the industry dominant AI playbook, but more at the system or the organizational level, is that it typically pushes AI as isolated vertical solutions without driving the system shift that is required to make these scalable and compounding. So, of course, the dominant playbook talks about governance, operating model shifts, and what have you. But in practice, what we see is just more of the same. So outdated governance models and ways of working, which were basically designed for a world where technology was centralized and controlled and very, or let's say, relatively slow moving. Just take the example of AI councils or ethics committees. I'm 100% sure you all have them. And they're probably a necessary evil, but they often operate like compliance boards, reviewing use cases one by one. And so while they may feel safe, they definitely slow down adoption, and they miss the fact that AI is entering into every function all at once these days. Same with the classical center of excellence model. I still see a lot of consultancy firms actually recommending it to companies that start their AI journey. That model centralizes ownership and expertise, but it ends up creating bottlenecks because AI adoption today is decentralized by nature, whether you like it or not, whether that's through SaaS vendors, shadow IT, employee experimentation. And so the big question is, why do most companies, or why have most companies, why have they been, and why are they still using this old-dated AI playbook? And if we go to the next slide, you'll see that from our point of view, there's likely a few different reasons. First, siloed pilots, tools spread across the organization probably feel safe and tangible. And most importantly, I think they also respect the existing organizational politics and structures. And so therefore, they avoid the hard conversations about the deeper change that's needed. We all want fast results, limited effort, minimal disruption, which is not surprising. It's a very human instinct to look for the easiest path forward. But the problem is that that instinct often reinforces the very patterns that keep companies stuck. And most importantly, as you can see on this slide, we believe that the traditional AI playbook has been built without recognizing AI as a general purpose technology. If there's anything that we would like you to remember from this webinar, it's that. So it has been built without recognizing AI as a general purpose technology, which is similar to the internet, and therefore reshaping competitive dynamics, changing the nature of how value is created or how work is done and how growth can be achieved. So the playbook basically treats AI like any other tool or almost like an IT upgrade. And so therefore it underestimates the systemic impact. And that's the crux of it. On these slides, again, AI is not just an efficiency tool, it's a general purpose technology. The kind of, we've seen it with internet or electricity, if you want another example. So it's the kind of technology that rewrites the rules of the game. And we've seen that story before. Again, when the internet emerged, a lot of traditional players basically thought of it as just another channel. But then the real disruption came from companies that rebuilt their business model around it, e-commerce businesses. And so giving rise to, again, things like e-commerce, social media, or entirely new forms of distribution. And so AI is now playing very much the same role. So just as the internet drove the marginal cost of distribution towards zero, we also see that AI is driving and will be driving the marginal cost of things like content creation or cognition towards zero. And then the history clearly shows that new challengers always emerge by building their core business model around these general purpose technologies, and so will be threatening the competitive edge of the most established players. And so that's why our basic message today is very simple, and that message is becoming AI native is not a nice to have. We believe that it's the only way, or will be the only way, to eventually stay relevant. And so if we move to the next slide, and I'm coming to the end of this first part, this is exactly why we at BOI have made it our mission to really shape clarity on how to pursue an alternative implementation playbook, which basically considers AI, or is built from the ground up with the understanding of AI, not as a tool that you add, but as a new operating system that really requires us to rethink how people work, how companies are structured, and how they operate, and how they achieve growth. And so in the next part of the webinar, Naomi is going to share some views on what an AI native approach looks like. Of course, we won't have the time to go in detail, but these views are based on a very, very comprehensive playbook that we've built and are actually actively piloting with several of our clients. Naomi, over to you.
Thank you very much. So Laura was detailing really the problem, or some of the existing concerns in the industry, and why that causes problems when it comes to incorporating a new sort of general purpose technology like AI. And this really brings us to what the alternative is. So as you've seen in the name of this webinar, AI native is the approach that we're going to be discussing here. Oh, skip 2 slides there. And what that approach does is it recognizes AI, first of all, in its general purpose nature. What we mean by that is it can be used for many different things. AI is not simply a small bolt-on tool that you can apply in certain areas. It actually has a wide range of applications. You've probably heard the term GPT, generative pre-trained transformer, but we also like to use GPT in terms of general purpose technology. So if you think about the internet example and how when the internet arrived, almost every business on the planet had to rework in order to fit to this new method of doing things, this new method of sharing information, this new method of purchasing. We're really viewing AI in that framework. So to repeat some of the problems that Laura highlighted in the first section, instead of having an organization where you're running 100 different small AI pilots, what you want to try and do is to think of AI really as the engine of your value creation, not this nice sort of paste on that you can run pilots on. So you need to think about it of how it can you use to power your growth or defend your competitive advantage. So it's about reshaping the business and how it sells and how it wins. Secondly, we discussed the problem of retrofitting. So this is taking an existing process and sort of saying, how can we put AI on top of this? How can AI make this more efficient? And one of the issues that Laura mentioned was, of course, that you've got an existing process. It's already going to have some legacy problems, probably. And what you don't want to do is cement those problems under further layers of technology. You don't want to simply duct tape some AI onto existing problems, because what you might then find is that the whole process is even more fragile. I'm sure anyone that works with sort of technology architecture will be familiar with lots and lots of changes to technology architecture without actually perhaps doing, a full sort of refit. And so an AI native approach would actually say, let's redesign these processes from zero around artificial intelligence. What would the AI version of this process actually look like, where humans are in orchestration roles and AI is running some of the more day-to-day processes that are required in order to achieve the end goal. And finally, thinking about the many sort of isolated solutions that might crop up in an organization. An AI native approach really thinks about having intelligence woven into the fabric of the organization. So in order to really see some of the bigger benefits of AI, wider than simply pasting on to little pilots, you actually have to recognize the operating model of your organization will need to change, governance will need to adapt, and of course, there's human elements like talent that of course will have to adjust to having a new sort of a way and a new approach, an AI native approach. One question we would sort of encourage you to ask yourself is, if there was a fully AI native competitor who entered our industry now, what part of our business would they make irrelevant first? And what parts would we still own? What parts can they not touch? Because that really helps you identify, actually the areas in your business where you might want to start considering, the application of AI first. When people hear the word native, typically, it means that you've kind of grown up in a specific area or with something specific. And, that's no different when we talk about AI native. Certain organizations are newer to the market and as a consequence have had those benefits, right from the start. And that, as a result of that, they've been able to build some competitive advantages using their sort of AI native approach, because they simply work differently. Their operating model is designed around intelligence, adaptation, and scale. So some examples here that we think are quite nice. First of all, Duolingo, that I'm sure, given the kind of global audience we've got today, there's many users of the famous language learning app with the very over-enthusiastic owl. And of course, there's many competitors in the market. There's many different methods of language learning, but traditionally it was very much based on human authored content. And so they've done an AI sort of strategic redesign here. And they didn't just put some AI features onto that human content. They didn't just say, let's have a little chat bot to help you understand how to conjugate better. They actually sort of reimagined the language learning process around AI. So shifting from the static content to more AI-powered adaptive learning. And one of their real key competitive advantage has, of course, been their proprietary data loops. So this is essentially all of the signals that they're capturing while you're interacting with their enthusiastic owl. Every hesitation, they're understanding what little pinpoints in language people are really struggling with. And these signals, they can feed back into refining their personalized proposition for you as a learner, but also their wider growth model, how they can go about attracting new customers in the future. And that feedback loop is going to constantly allow them to improve and personalize, and is something that is absolutely unique to them, that proprietary data, because any organization might be able to buy the same AI tooling that they have, but they can't necessarily have access to that proprietary data, which gives them quite significant competitive edge. A second example we have here is from the payment provider Stripe. You might have noticed fintech has bred quite a number of AI native players, because it's an industry, to my mind, which is very heavily embedded in the digital world. Clean data matters, automation matters, and being able to scale really matters. So it's a really fertile ground for AI native players. And of course, Stripe is competing with payment providers who have much larger brand recognition. And so what they've been able to do is actually layer AI processes in from the beginning as a result of being AI native. So embedding that intelligence into their processes as opposed to trying to bolt it on afterwards, which gives them much more effective ways of identifying, fraudulent transactions and providing the trust that customers want in order to go with their brand, as opposed to some of the other better known competitors. And finally, one example at the bottom that I personally quite like, but maybe sort of less well known, is an example of a provider in the insurance space, or the insurtech space, called Cover. And what I think is really nice about them is there's a huge amount of hype in the AI world. I don't need to tell anybody on this call that. And of course, a lot of AI native organizations appear to be doing very well due to huge quantities of investment. There are some believers, and as a result, they've got a lot of money in their pockets right now. But Cover very much have money in their pockets with a very small number of employees, and haven't done it through raising a large amount of capital. They've done it because they have a very profitable business model. And again, what they've been able to do is take a more AI native approach as a result of being relatively new to the market. And so how they've done this is ensuring that the AI embedded in their organization allows them to test new opportunity models, new growth models at a scale that larger insurance providers aren't able to work with. So one of their most profitable offerings is sort of short-term car insurance. So for example, I would like to borrow my friend's car for 2 or 3 days. A larger insurance provider might not have produced that as an offering so quickly and taken that to market, or been willing to, because they would have said that perhaps the underwriting process associated with that wasn't necessarily worth the amount of money they could earn for it. But actually being AI native from the start, Cover have been able to test these new growth methods and hold on to that competitive advantage as a result of being able to bring new products to market faster than some of the incumbents. So it's all very well to say, it's nice for newer organizations to take an AI native approach, but sort of how do companies who've been around a little bit longer actually benefit from more of an AI native approach? And some bigger players who, of course, have a lot more legacy in the market have also been making some sort of confident steps in these directions. And one organization we're quite familiar with, Nestle, they're really thinking about rewriting core operations with AI. So in marketing, they're rebuilding the chain. So that goes from sort of campaign planning, content creation, media buying, really keeping embedded at the center AI. And what's really powerful is actually the way they structure the ownership. So you don't want AI strategy being an isolated function that sort of sits in the middle of an organization. It sits within business units who actually have awareness of what needs to be done in order to achieve success. So each business unit having dedicated AI owners, whether it's in brand, supply chain, sales, HR. So adoption is tied to the outcomes and not simply tied to experiments. And that's really the mark of sort of AI native shifts. You're having intelligence built in the places in the organization where intelligence should sit because they manage how the company should work. Another organization that you also see sort of bringing this approach in is Shell. And Shell, as I'm sure you can imagine, can be very sort of research forward, very forward thinking in their approach. And as a result, they did start their AI journey quite early. And again, instead of having AI sit in a centralized space, they're trying to embed ownership in the business. And one of the ways they've enabled this is by having sort of modular, reusable AI components. So having AI components that can be shared across different business units, allowing the people who really know where the growth is coming from to actually start implementing AI in ways that don't necessarily require a technical experts at every level. And that really allows them to shift from this place where you're doing small isolated experiments to where you have sort of cross-organizational adoption. Apologies. And finally, we move on to AB InBev on the right-hand side of the slide. They make a lot of very tasty beverages, if you're not familiar with them. And again, they've taken more of an AI native approach by having an AI nerve center that connects their marketing and logistics into one. So this is about not having processes that start and end within one department, but ensuring that whatever is driving your growth has an AI lens put all the way across it to ensure that those handovers are not going to be inefficient and to ensure that actually you can have this dynamic retail execution that spans different parts of the business. And this really shifts the roles of the teams within the organization as well, because you're no longer thinking about manual processes. They're restructuring themselves around these AI-driven workflows and what that means for the individuals who are operating within those structures. But one thing that draws all of these three organizations together is also they're leaning into AI ecosystem partnerships. I realize there's a lot of words in that sentence, but essentially all we're saying is making friends in the AI world, whether that's with your tech giants like NVIDIA that everybody seems to want to be friends with, or consortiums of research partners, universities, or even startup innovation hubs, ensuring that you are talking to the latest technology developers. And by having that, they're able to ensure that, first of all, when new technology comes around, so some of you may have seen in the last few days, Google have finalized their payment agent protocol, which will allow you to neatly purchase from within your favorite AI assistant. Having interactions with these big ecosystem players ensures that you're considered within the wider space. So it's a little bit like, early adopters to people who realized that SEO was important. Being integrated with the wider AI ecosystem is a real core sort of tenet of trying to be AI native. Apologies. So that brings us to the third section of this webinar. And this is really going to be about the how. How do you go about taking an AI native approach? And the way we consider this is using three sort of interconnected shifts. So the first one, on the left-hand side, we have the strategic shift. So this is about treating AI as the engine of your growth. So no longer having your 4,000 small pilots, 95% of which might fail, but actually ensuring that your pilots and your time and your skills are utilized on the real reinvention bets and not simply on every small optimization opportunity. Secondly, we have the execution shift. This is about not, of course, duct taping AI onto every single process, but actually rebuilding workflows with an AI lens. So having incremental gains as opposed to linear gains that you might have had previously. And finally, on the right-hand side, the system shift. So this really underpins the other two. Organizationally, how do you coordinate and scale this intelligence enterprise-wide to ensure that the whole organization can operate in an AI native manner, where AI is not considered a nice to have. It's really considered this general purpose technology, like the internet, that will reshape how almost every business needs to operate. So to go into a little bit more detail on those three, I'll start with the strategic shift. So again, this is about rewiring your advantage. This is about thinking about what your growth is and how AI can help support that growth. And some of the areas that we would encourage you to think about here are, first of all, asking yourself, disrupt yourself questions. For example, if, a 10-person AI startup was going to enter our industry, how would they do it? How would they beat us? Or perhaps asking a question of, it's 10 years in the future and things have been going really badly for us. Why? And that's called a pre-mortem, so to speak, thinking about your death prior to it. And the reason why you might want to ask yourself questions like that is it shifts the mindset from purely thinking about what are today problems, why is this process not running efficiently? Why do we have failures here? Why do we employ thousands of people to do this? And really to imagining the tomorrow. So surfacing the opportunities of tomorrow, but also the vulnerabilities that you might need to start considering. Secondly, mapping your strategic levers. What we mean by this is not necessarily thinking just about the processes within your organization, but what are the flows that drive your advantage? So, for example, you might think actually your pricing is what drives your competitive advantage, your ability to change pricing, your speed, your customer personalization, your trust, your distribution network. And running that mapping exercise to really identify, why you currently have a business actually enables you to sort of focus your efforts in the right place. So you can test them against these questions of, okay, if speed is our competitive advantage, can AI make that 10 times better? Or could AI make this entire competitive advantage totally irrelevant? And that allows us to really focus our resources on the areas where reinvention matters, instead of spreading out your effort on sort of 400 pilots that may not necessarily lead to such strategic reinvention. Third up, we have data loops, thinking about them as a competitive advantage. As I've mentioned previously, defensibility in the AI era is also about ensuring that you have something that your competitors cannot have. And from a technology standpoint, they may be able to have all the technology that you have and perhaps all of the intelligent individuals in their organization to make it happen. So really, what proprietary data can you generate and learn from to ensure that you can maintain a competitive advantage? And so every reinvention bet, every focus of your strategic shift really should have something that underpins it from a data wheel perspective. So ensuring that you're constantly learning from all of the interactions that you are encouraging, much like with Duolingo. And finally, thinking about a more future-backed strategy. So instead of doing a scan of the market and saying, look at all these fabulous, shiny new tools we have, really saying, what if an AI native version of this business was built from scratch? So really sort of showing how you might build a business today, but another showing how that might be built with more of an AI native logic. And the gap between the two really shows us where we want to think about applying AI, and perhaps what areas we don't need to worry about it so much in, where AI is less relevant. And it ensures that we're not just retrofitting AI onto processes where perhaps it's less useful or perhaps even harmful to our overall proposition. Just in the interest of time, I will skip this slide. But essentially, it's sort of covering some of the strategic advantages that typically are realized through data loops and through reusable workflows, reusable assets, and having strategic distribution, so being embedded in the right ecosystems. So just a little sort of tidbit, I suppose, for you to take away. We do have some more tooling that we work with in order to help sort of put this reinvention lens on. So in order to help focus the conversation around what are our reinvention bets going to be, as opposed to what should our 400 pilots be. So we have a provocation template. Oh, I'm sorry, English is hard sometimes. Provocation prompts template. These are your what if questions. So what if a competitor could onboard customer in 30 seconds? What if open models totally commoditized our entire offering? And then what you want to do is to sort of separate the noise from the signal. And so for that, we have a strategic lever mapping canvas. So that's shown on the slide here, that really helps your team sort of prioritize the parts of the business that are actually driving your competitive advantage, your personalization, your trust, your speed, or your ownership of outcome. And from those two parts, we can start reverse engineering. You can start with the reinvention concept, and then you trace back the workflows and technologies required. And in order to do this, you can use our intervention pattern cards to stretch our thinking and cluster bets by your ambition. So the goal here really is to land on a few sort of high conviction bets, so which are clearly articulated in their sort of AI native form versus their current logic form, which allows you to build on your sort of hypotheses that you're testing and then give you a directional sort of AI native transformation sketch. So one little example sort of from our back catalogue, I suppose, of clients we've worked with, we work with a very, very large nonprofit organization who essentially were trying to continue their growth, their fundraising growth, with high net worth individuals. But in order to increase that growth, they typically had to bring on a lot more resources because high net worth individuals require a lot of white glove or sort of bespoke attention. Meaning that their growth would be entirely linear. And really what they wanted to try and do was to see if there was an alternative. And putting an AI native lens on that instead allowed them to think about how the whole operation could be revitalized to give them growth which is more than linear. So ultimately what they wanted to do was enable them to segment and tailor outreach by audience, automating underlying processes that perhaps didn't require the white glove experience to allow the humans to focus on the parts of the job that really did require that human touch. And beyond simply fundraising, this sort of AI native approach also allowed them to focus on managing their volunteer coordination, optimizing their grant allocation applications and streamlining back office operations, allowing them to actually ensure that where human intervention was required, human intervention was available, which gives them a growth model that isn't built around many, many pilots, but is actually built around reimagining the most important processes that are valuable to the organization. Moving on to the execution shift. So the execution shift, if you remember, is about not taking an existing process and just duct taping some AI to it. It's about looking at the process from the beginning and reimagining what it might look like with an AI lens. So some practical tips here. First of all, think about workflows and not functions. If you do this in a sort of federated manner, so across marketing, across HR, across finance, then you potentially lead to areas where your processes aren't actually a fully fledged format which grows your organization, because there's often handover in processes between different functions. So for example, client onboarding will involve several different functions in order to achieve the ultimate outcome, which is bringing on the new customer. So we really encourage you to choose workflows such as that, which cut across multiple areas. Another example would be claims processing. Again, there will be several different functions who would touch that process, and that process is very fundamental to the growth of an organization. So by redesigning that end-to-end flow, you're no longer reinforcing the handoffs between different functions. You're ensuring that there is not duplication. Any legacy bottlenecks which might be making the process quite fragile, you're able to resolve in one go, rather than doing more of a kind of optimizing small fragments. The second part here is about redesigning from zero. So when we talk about a zero-based workflow, we literally mean rub it out and start again. If we were going to build this today with AI, what would it look like? Try not to take all the baggage of the existing workflow into the future. What would the AI native competitor do? What would the Duolingo of your industry do? Really mapping every step in that process, assigning the ownership. Is it going to be an agent? Is it going to be human? Is it going to be hybrid? And challenging whether steps should even exist. Does this have a requirement or not? And that really shifts AI from being this helper, this assistant, this add-on, to being the backbone of the process execution. The third point here is about our human handoffs. So as I mentioned with the flow, when you redesign a process, you need to think about, what parts of it are owned by an agent and what parts of it are going to be owned by a human. And actually having those discussions is hugely relevant to, current, risk and ethics considerations, and actually allows you to ensure that you're having, human approval, human escalation, human exceptions where necessary, and brings about those conversations that, might be necessary within the business. But it also ensures that you're reducing errors in the process and building trust and accountability at the same time. Finally, we talk once again about embedding these loops of data. So as you redesign a workflow, ensuring that you're embedding these opportunities to become more intelligent, to build that competitive edge through data. Because as I've mentioned previously a couple of times, your competitors can probably get the same tooling, but they cannot get your proprietary learnings. So ensuring that your workflows bake that feedback into every step, every interaction, every approval, rejection, correction, should make sure that it works to improve the system, so that you have self-learning intelligence and hold your competitive advantage. Once again, we do have some tooling in this area. What this tooling is designed to do is to support you with your zero-based workflow. So that's essentially starting from scratch. How might you go about doing that? And also supporting you with producing an AI native data governance scorecard. So as you redesign a workflow, ensuring that you're redesigning something with the governance structures in place to make it appropriate for any regulations, any concerns within your industry that might be specific to the workflow. And the aim of the execution shift ultimately is to get you to a place where you have redesigned AI native workflows with new role definitions, new orchestration logic, and are ready for pilots which have specific hypotheses attached to them and specific hypotheses that are attached to your reinvention growth lens, alongside guardrails and feedback, which Lara will go into a little bit more detail when we touch upon the system shift. But just to sort of wind up on the execution shift, really what I would say is that AI is really forcing companies to consider some of the structural problems from a technology standpoint and from a people standpoint that we've probably tolerated for years. I'm sure anyone who works with any kind of technology has occasionally thought, "Oh God, why can't they just get this right?" And certainly, the arrival of AI gives us that opportunity to say, "Okay, hang on a minute. Now we have put an AI native lens on this. How would we build this differently?" So instead of simply saying, let's stick some AI on top, actually, how can we reinvent this? And, again, a little example from our own experience. We worked with a telco who used to spend 12 hours on onboarding. Of course, onboarding is all about, signing a deal. And as anyone who's done any sales would know, time kills deals. 12 hours is too long. So a zero-based redesign, actually starting from the ground, allowed them to put agents in all the right touch points, all the friction places in that process to ensure that then they were able to get an onboarding process, which was now just 45 minutes instead. I'll now hand over to Laura to wrap up on the system shift, which is the third part of the AI native shifts required.
Thanks, Naomi, and thanks, guys. I'll try to slow down. It's not my most natural strength, but I'm gonna do my best. The final shift, so the system shift towards an AI native approach, is very closely related to the workflow redesign that Naomi just discussed, but it applies it at the system level. So think about this being about re-architecting how your company operates or how it runs. So it touches on elements like governance, investments, capital allocation, roles, structure, technology, basically in a way that helps the value of AI to scale and compound across the enterprise rather than remaining stuck in silos. And so this slide lists some of these systemic shifts that companies have to go through. For the sake of time, I'm not going to discuss each of these, but I would like to zoom in on one or two very related ones, and those are governance and technology ownership. And why? Because we've seen some very significant shifts occurring in the industry in the way AI is governed and in the way AI is delivered in a very in a relatively short amount of time. So let's go to the next slide. So traditionally, AI governance has really focused almost entirely on risk control. So again, think about human-led committees, councils, static PowerPoints full of guardrails. I'm sure you've seen some of them. And so I would say that the dominant playbook reinforces that approach by promoting centralization. Again, I still see a lot of consultancy firms promoting centralization as the only way to basically contain costs and risk. And so in most companies, we see that AI was or still is actually mostly delivered through a central team or through corporate AI expert teams. Now, the reality, though, and you can see that on this slide, is that AI adoption is already heavily decentralized. And we see AI entering organizations through every open door: product, marketing, HR, operations, sales. Everyone is basically experimenting, whether that's with open source models or browser plugins or no-code agents, low-code, everyday tools like Microsoft. And so just as a proof point, Gartner recently conducted a survey of approximately 500 senior technology leaders, which also included CIOs. And so what they actually found was that only a minority of AI capabilities are built by their IT teams. And so the rest is basically emerging at the edges. So it's led by marketing teams, HR, operations, and so on. And so nearly every team is experimenting, tools are proliferating, and costs are sprawling. And this is all happening fast, and it's happening at scale, and it's often happening invisible to any traditional control structures. And so what we see is that many of our clients or many corporate AI leaders in general are realizing that there's no way to control or centralize this movement anymore. And I would even argue that centralization of AI is an illusion, because it's simply too slow, it's too rigid, and it's especially blind to what's actually really happening. And again, centralization to me is again resulting from the failure to recognize AI as a general purpose technology that is also becoming heavily democratized. And so that's a new environment, and it's actually introducing a whole new layer of complexity for mostly AI leaders or corporate leaders. And so I would say, I would summarize probably the challenge is now about how to give freedom within guardrails and how to make sure that what happens at the edges, and at edges I mean as opposed to corporate, so from a functional perspective or business unit perspective, so how to make sure that that is scalable, that it's interoperable, and how to make sure that it's safe, while at the same time trying to avoid kill innovation or the very experimentation that is actually driving adoption. And so our perspective is that what companies need is not more central control or not more human-led approvals or checkpoints or committees, but actually something we call orchestration. What do we mean by that? We mean automated, embedded governance that really can flow as fast as the technology itself, because we try to automate everything except for the very, for governance, basically. And so that's why on the next slide, you can see it, we've built a framework, which we call the GATE framework, and it shifts the focus of AI governance from central and from human-led control to that automated embedded orchestration or governance that is basically automated, embedded in the flow of work, and can, again, flow at the same speed as AI itself. The essence of that framework is to make sure that everyone in the organization who wants to experiment with AI can do that safely and can do that effectively. So that means making sure that everyone understands the rules, making sure that everyone can build experiments in ways that can actually grow and scale instead of becoming dead ends, which we often see, and also making sure that everyone knows how to use AI responsibly with guidance basically built into their day-to-day workflows and tools, and making sure that they can can get started easily. Think approved data, approved templates, approved connectors, or any examples they can reuse rather than having to reinvent the wheel. If you want to learn more about the framework, please visit our website or look for our article. You can see it here at the top of this slide. You can also check my LinkedIn profile. We are already actively applying that framework to some of our clients. And if you go to the next slide, just to give you one example, we work a lot with consumer goods companies. One of them had nearly 150 disconnected AI pilots or tools across functions. And so we've supported them with building a self-serve hub, which again contains pre-approved connectors, a shared orchestration layer, things like prompt libraries. And so based on that, they've been able to kill some of the mushrooming, kill some or unify some of the tooling, which then obviously led to faster and more repeatable deployments across teams. So the essence of the system shift, and we can now move to the final slide of this section, is again to treat AI as infrastructure, not a tool, and to rebuild how you govern, how you operate, and how you organize. And so the biggest shift in our perspective is to move from the traditional command and control structures to orchestration, so that value can flow and can also compound across teams. And the art is not to slow down any bottom-up experiments with red tape, but then to make sure that we bake in interoperability and synergies into these edges. As we are nearing the end of this presentation, we would like to end with a few tips to start your AI native shifts. If we go to the next slide, first tip, start small, but make it structural. What do we mean? We highly recommend you to pick maybe one high friction, but a mission critical workflow, and try to redesign it end to end with an AI first lens. There was a question around that in the chat. So don't just automate existing tasks, but really try to reimagine the whole flow as if it's built from the ground up with 80% of the work done by AI. And that really helps to create, let's say, living proof inside the organization of what an AI native workflow looks like. We're actually actively applying it with some of our scale-up clients, for instance, in the space of paid socials. And yeah, it's leading to some first results. Second, also make sure to shift the focus from use cases to domain reinvention. We all talk about use cases. Instead of trying to think use cases or think I need a tool that helps me to do better, let's say, customer segmentation, ask how can we redesign our approach to acquiring new customers. So avoid hunting those disconnected use cases, but think domain reinvention, because we see is that adopting that broader lens helps to create coherence and also ensure that every project builds into a larger shift and allows for that compounding advantage. And then third, remember that workflow and process redesign, Naomi already touched upon it, are the single biggest chance to clean the house. Meaning rationalizing your technology stack, embedding stronger data governance, higher data quality, tighter access control. So also for those companies that are operating in very heavily regulated industries. These investments are not just about making AI work, they are about strengthening the very foundations of the business. So cleaner, more reliable data, simpler and more secure systems, faster change cycles, and also teams that can learn and adapt in real time. Again, what I've seen in the industry is that too often tech implementation, process design, data governance are all treated as separate tracks and dealt with by different people, while in reality, they are actually inseparable and need to be combined. And so that's exactly what an AI-first transformation does. And it makes the business case very clear. It's the moment to eliminate your shadow IT, duplicated tools, and fragmented licenses and replace them with a more future-proof foundation. And then finally, most importantly, I guess, make sure that everyone in the organization, and especially sponsors and stakeholders, understands that real cost savings and productivity gains and ROI only materializes when AI is paired with process redesign. We see that those expectations are largely absent. And so it's clear that it's important to set those expectations from the get-go. So AI is not a plug-and-play solution. Finally, it's a general purpose technology that only delivers real returns when companies are willing to rewire how work gets done. Thanks a lot. There were a whole lot of different questions, and we only have 3 minutes left. I don't know, Naomi, if there's one that you have been, I saw a lot of interesting questions, happy to address them, but maybe you want to kick us off.
Sure. I'm going to start with a very easy one in that will this be available afterwards? And yes, it will. But one question that does have a lot of votes on, I notice, is can a company become AI native if it's not built from the ground up with AI? Do you believe that you can fix a company retroactively? So I think that's an interesting question that we're thinking about it in terms of fixing, so to speak. You know, I would question whether we're talking about fixing or whether we're talking about, you know, making them future ready, because clearly if things are going well enough at the moment for them to be operating, then they might not require fixing immediately, but they will in the near future. I do certainly think it's a challenge. I think any of you who are perhaps familiar with the tech transformation required to move over from on-prem to cloud, for example, will know that that was significant. And players who were cloud native, of course, you know, had that first step in the journey already taken into account. But I think you could view it as a disadvantage in that you're a legacy organization that are not AI native. But equally, you have to remember that in order to gain that advantage, there is also the process of having proprietary knowledge. You already have learnings from being in that industry for a long time. You hopefully already have proprietary data. You already have the experience that would hopefully enable you to sort of keep up, so to speak, with AI native players who perhaps are doing it with their technology first, but don't have some of that sort of proprietary data loop, some of that competitive advantage baked in. So I do think it's possible, but I do think, you know, like any kind of transformation, whether that be sort of organizational or technological, you know, it comes with its challenges. So I think there's certainly a lot to think about there, but it certainly doesn't mean that every single sort of organization who's been around more than the last few years should close their minds to AI and think, well, we'll never catch up anyway. Do you have anything to add, Laura?
Well, we are at the hour, Naomi, and there's still plenty of questions. What I propose is that if you have a pressing question and want it to be addressed, please feel free to reach out. But just being respectful of the time, I propose that we end the session. Many thanks for the engagement and all the interactions in the chat. Very much appreciated. Also your time. And as already shared in the chat, we will definitely share the recording and the slides. Have a fantastic day or evening.
Thank you.